Here in Germany, people have been remembering one of the country's worst natural disasters in recent times. 5 years ago, torrential rainfall led to devastating flash flooding in the Ahr River Valley in the far west of the country. More than 100 people were killed by the floodwaters, which also swept away homes and livelihoods. Today, many, but not all, of the physical scars have disappeared. But for the local community, wounds remain.
The Ahr Valley in western Germany. Today, it looks peaceful, with its famous wine, hiking trails and quiet villages. But just 5 years ago, this river was at the center of Germany's worst flood disaster in decades. In just a single night, thousands of homes were damaged and 135 people lost their lives here. Now, life seems back to normal, but small reminders of the flood are all around, raising the question, how are the people of the Ahr Valley searching for closure while still living through the aftermath? At the town church, I meet Armin von Ameln, who has lived in the valley for most of his life.
I was coming home when suddenly there was a loud roar, and then I was standing in water up to here. It happened so fast. That's when I knew this is a disaster.
As a practicing Catholic, faith helps him stay grounded.
This is how high the water was. The line is a reminder it could happen again.
He takes me to the nearby cemetery, which was also devastated by the flood. Now, rebuilt, the community hopes to honor the victims inside the restored chapel.
Helping one another, comforting one another, that is the most important task we have now. The more you talk about it, the better you can cope with a lot of things. If you keep it bottled up, it can lead to some very serious illnesses, especially mental health issues.
Dr. Katharina Scharping leads the Trauma Help Center in the Ahr Valley, which aims to support those in need.
When it rains outside, it immediately becomes a topic of conversation. A lot of people are afraid and don't leave the house anymore. Now it has shifted to existential concerns, financial worries, depression, increased substance abuse and bitterness. Also, when the reconstruction isn't going as expected.
She tells me that 5 years later, around 4,000 people here are still psychologically affected by the flood. And yet, despite everything, many people chose to stay and rebuild, even as experts warn that flooding in the Ahr Valley could happen again.
It was clear to us from the very beginning, we'll keep going. Childhood and everything spent here. That shapes who you are, that connection. Nobody can get me to leave here.
That feeling is echoed here again and again. But as the reconstruction continues, many physical traces of the flood are slowly disappearing. Researchers warn that over time, societies can begin underestimating flood risks, especially as memories of the disaster become more distant. Some German experts call this flood amnesia. Such fear of forgetting is partially why the Denk-Ahr Association is planning a permanent memorial at this site.
So outsiders can simply get a sense. If you picture a height of 4.5 meters, what would that be like? If you imagine it as water, I think it feels completely different.
In the marathon more than 20 years ago, I fell into a coma but woke up again and was allowed to live. The victims who lost their lives in the terrible Ahr disaster all wanted to live, but were not allowed to. That made a deep impression on me.
The group hopes to add 136 bronze stones to the large memorial for each flood victim in the valley, with the last one empty as a symbol for those who died of its consequences.
Above all, this has left an emotional scar on everyone affected here in the Ahr Valley. That will take a long time. The memorial helps us to keep remembering that this happened, even if the scars may no longer be visible here.
While some residents support the project with donations, others are less enthusiastic. Including a woman I met here. She told me if you walk past this house every day, it's enough of a memorial. In the Ahr Valley, the search for closure continues along different paths, with many residents learning how to live alongside their painful memories. All this, of course, while the river flows on.
And I am joined now by Heidi Kreibich. She is the head of the hydrology section at the Helmholtz Center for Geosciences in Potsdam. She's also the co-author of a study that's looked into the exceptionally high number of fatalities in the Ahr Valley back then. You know, we have 5 years after the Ahr Valley disaster, what do you see as the most important lesson that Germany has learned, and where do you still see the shortcomings?
Yeah, so what we have learned is that with such extraordinary, extreme events like the 2021 event in the Ahr Valley, the structural flood protection is overwhelmed. So we cannot build as high levees, for instance, and retention bassins, which would withstand such an extreme event, which was expected to occur once in over 8,500 years. So this is really exceptional. So we need other measures to complement the flood protection. So for instance, early warning. And novel tools have been developed since then. For instance, impact-based forecasting. So this means that we do not only forecast precipitation amounts or the discharge at the gorging stations, but also we are able to forecast inundation areas, water depth and flow velocity, which is of course much better information to undertake emergency decisions in such an event. However, what are shortcomings?
Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more about the shortcomings, because I'm wondering, your research, it found that many people underestimated the danger and that warning and evacuation measures, they were insufficient at the time. So if a flood of similar magnitude happened tomorrow, would the region be better prepared today? What more needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, this extraordinary event really triggered a lot of measures. Even the Federal Ministry for Research has implemented projects for scientific underpinning of the reconstruction. And so novel tools have been developed, such as impact-based forecasting. We ourselves have done this RIM2D, for instance, but this is still in the pilot phase. So in some communities in North Rhine-Westphalia, this is now implemented, but it's not really implemented everywhere. And it would be very helpful, particularly so that decision makers and also the affected people would not again underestimate such an event. Because you can imagine if somebody tells you we have 150 millimeters of rain, then people often do not know what does this really mean for which areas in the catchment.
And especially because it was interesting that your study found that many of these fatalities occurred outside of the officially mapped hazard zones. What does that tell us about how we assess and communicate flood risk, especially with a changing climate?
Yes, so these flood hazard maps, for instance, they are developed on the measured time series at the gorging stations. And in the Ahr Valley, it was the case that during the measured 75 years in the past, not such an extreme event had occurred. It had occurred long in the past, in 1804, for instance, but this historic information had not been taken into consideration for the development of these hazard maps. So this has now been improved. So for the Ahr Valley, much better and also covering much more severe events, hazard maps are available. But the question is also, how does it look like in other parts of Germany and other parts of Europe, for instance? Therefore, also science, again, has developed new approaches to develop realistic, extreme scenarios. So, for instance, we have undertaken this for Germany and also for the Ahr Valley, where we shifted inundation precipitation fields to develop really extraordinary events, scenarios, which then can be used for a better preparedness and better preparation for such really outstanding events, which unfortunately we will need to prepare for in case due to climate change.
Heidi Kreibich from the Helmholtz Center of Geosciences. Thank you so much.
Thank you.